Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. He is Daniel Gallen. We are broadcasting from Beaver Stadium, a very chilly Beaver Stadium. It is Saturday night, and Penn State is heading to the Big Ten championship game. We got more than we bargained for when we came to the stadium earlier this afternoon on Saturday as Michigan upset Ohio State during the noon slate of games. Shocker. Ohio State was favored by more than 3 touchdowns, I believe, for that matchup or in that ballpark. They end up losing. That opens the door for Penn State to win, and you're in for Indianapolis next Saturday. They handle business following an ugly start, score the final 44 points of a 44-7 victory over the Maryland Terrapins. Penn State is 11-1 for the first time since 2008. They are headed to the Big Ten championship for the first time since 2016. I think we can now very confidently say, Daniel, they are going to the college football playoff for the first time ever. Got a lot in front of us here all of a sudden for the month of December.
It's a crazy day. I mean, you talk about not really knowing what we were in for when we got to Beaver Stadium today. I know from my end, when I got to the stadium, I was like, well, I should have something ready, just a post that's either, Penn State alive for the Big Ten championship game, Penn State eliminated from Big Ten championship contention, just to cover all of our bases. But then about, that Michigan-Ohio State game keeps going and you get deeper and deeper into the game and it starts becoming like, oh, I need to get this story ready that Penn State is still alive. And then I'm going to have something ready for in case they beat Maryland, which I think we all expected them to do. So, yeah, it's been a bit of a whirlwind, about as big of a whirlwind as you could have for a game that was anticlimactic as this one was, in terms of pretty much what we all said would happen and predicted would happen, happened. But, yeah, I mean, my flight's booked to Indy. My hotel's booked in Indy. I think I still got to file a credential request and all that stuff, but we're going to a 13th week, and we're looking at another game in December, potentially one or over New Year's. And hey, this is what we're here for. This is what they play the games for, and let's have some fun.
It's the first time in 8 years where Penn State is basically being thrown an opponent here a week before you play them. That time it was Wisconsin. They ended up beating Wisconsin in Indianapolis. They had 2 regular season losses in 2016, so ultimately they were left on the doorstep of that 14 playoff, as everyone who's listening and watching knows very well at this point. Whereas now, Daniel, you're left with, I would say, I guess, the safety net of sorts, or kind of the plan B here is maybe you do end up in Beaver Stadium again. Maybe you do get that 8th home game here in 2024, and it's a first-round home matchup. That's where we had them pegged at coming into this. We just figured they'd have a few weeks away from football before resurfacing for that matchup. Instead now, yes, that remains an option. But you get a chance to play the current number 1 team in the country, the Oregon Ducks. They handled their business today against Washington. They're going to be 12-0 on the regular season, their debut campaign in the Big Ten Conference. And I know we'll talk about this matchup as we learn a lot more about Oregon, as we try to figure out where Penn State is from a few different angles going into this upcoming week. But whether you're speaking with Penn State people, whether it's people on the beat, this wasn't really anticipated. And a big part of that was you figured Ohio State was going to snap that 3-game losing streak to a 6-5 Michigan team. And when that doesn't happen, and all of a sudden you've got this chance, Daniel, to go out, play Oregon, one of those marquee matchups that Penn State hasn't really shown up the way they want to show up in recent seasons, although they've been piling up 10-win seasons, 11-win seasons. This is a chance to do that. And quite frankly, people around Penn State are kind of scratching their heads at the possibility of this being the number 1 overall seeded program in the college football playoff. Because if they beat the Oregon Ducks, the number 1 team in the country, I'd like their shot at being that number 1 team, having that first weekend off of the college football playoff. And all of a sudden, this is right there, a big realm of possibility. In Ann Arbor, they're still going to be talking about a season that finished 7-5, fell short of expectations. They'll have that win over Ohio State, but it was very much a underwhelming year for them. In Columbus, They're talking about firing their head coach, even though they're waiting to hear where they're going to be in the college football playoff. And there's still a chance the Buckeyes are hosting a playoff game in Columbus, but there is straight up upheaval right now on that campus and how they feel about the regime and what they didn't get to do. And here we are, James Franklin, 11 wins for the first time. He told us in postgame he feels like this is the most competitive the conference has ever been. It makes sense why he'd want to say that on a day like this. But, Daniel, we didn't think 3 or 4 weeks ago, coming off another loss to Ohio State, that Franklin would be in a situation to exit the regular season with this kind of cachet. But here he is, and he's got a golden opportunity here in the next 7 days to figure out a way to beat the top-ranked team in all the land and totally throw people for a loop, because I think a lot of folks thought they had the read on these Nittany Lions when they were coming off the field and he was being booed by Nittany Lions fans on October 5th. That ain't the narrative anymore.
I know when you think about this game that's going to be happening exactly a week from now, I'm sure we'll get into it more next week, but the narratives that are going to be around it and the opportunity that this is going to be for James Franklin and for this Penn State program, it's going to be very, very massive. They can really change. We talk about it a lot, that college football so much of it is about perception. And James Franklin alluded to that tonight in some comments. And this is something that could really, really change Penn State's perception. I think the fact that they're in the Big Ten championship game maybe alters that perception a little bit too, even though I know that some skeptics out there might say that they backed in or however, what have you. But I just think you think back to that Ohio State game 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, November 2nd, after the game, guys are talking that, all of our goals are still in front of us. And at the time, in your head, you're kind of like, well, making the college football playoff as like a low seed. That was kind of where maybe getting to host a first round game. That's kind of where you viewed the ceiling of this team. But in that first set of playoff rankings, they're at number 6. So they did not get punished very much for losing to Ohio State. And then you just look at what they've done over these past 4 weeks, where 3 of the past 4 games have been double-digit blowouts with really no question in them. The 4th was last week at Minnesota, where you get a really gutsy win on the road against a team coming off a bye, and they took care of business. And I think that's what we said they needed to do coming out of Ohio State. And I think that it just shows that a lot of the stuff that James Franklin preaches and a lot of stuff that these college football coaches everywhere preach really does work out in the end sometimes, where you control what you can control. James Franklin likes to talk about going 1-0. I know that he was asked on Monday about potentially playing for the Big Ten title, and he said, we got to get through Maryland first. That's the one thing that's on our mind. Obviously, we know that army of analysts and support staffers, some of those guys were probably digging into the Oregon film, or at least they should have been. And then you come out on the other side, and this is where you are. I think that it's been a crazy year overall. I know we were up late last night watching Georgia Tech and the type of game that was. And then you watch Ohio State, Michigan, the type of game that was. Anything can happen. And you just really look at what James Franklin has done over the past 3 years, and Penn State has avoided getting tripped up somewhere that they shouldn't. And I think that has really served them well, and it has them in the position where, I mean, if they do beat Oregon, like, I assume they would be the number 1 seed. I think that the way that things are set up right now, that's how things are looking. And it's really wild to think about, considering where we were a month ago, even where we were 2 months ago. And especially, West Virginia was today's November 30th. That was August 31st. So like exactly 3 months ago, where we were then and to where we are now.
Yeah, and you look in, what's separating Penn State from the other contenders, and it's been such a wild year in college football. And look, not everybody's going to win the marquee matchups, the Alabama, Georgia, the Penn State versus Ohio State, but it's about avoiding the pitfalls for the remainder of your schedule. And you look across football and some of these losses that have derailed seasons and really impacted. I mean, Georgia Tech was almost knocked Georgia out of the whole conversation last week, although I guess Georgia would have had a chance to go to the SEC championship game. But that was an example. You see it here with the 6-5 Michigan team. They haven't looked impressive really any week coming off their national championship. and they go beat Ohio State. And Oregon obviously is one of those teams that hasn't tripped up along the way. But Penn State now 31 consecutive wins over unranked opponents. They are 31-0, generally speaking, since 2002 during the regular season, unless it's Ohio State or Michigan that we're talking about. So they have really proven to be a team that consistently beats who they're expected to beat. This time around, you could make a case, well, if Michigan was on their schedule, would it have mattered this year? But you had Ohio State in the schedule. You couldn't get past them. People thought that might be the defining, wart for this 2024 squad. And now they get a chance to do something that Ohio State can't do this year. Ohio State hasn't done since the 2020 COVID season, which is to go and compete for a Big Ten championship. And so Penn State gets to do that on Saturday. And Daniel, let's talk a little bit about what happened on this Saturday, because it was kind of a rough start, to say the least. And we're thinking, well, look, it's all in front of you. The door's wide open. All you got to do is walk through it here in front of your home crowd at Beaver Stadium, and you're in the Big Ten championship game. And then it took 2 plays of offensive football for this game to be kind of thrown off its axis. The first play was a fumble out of the hands of Nick Singleton on Penn State's initial offensive snap. He lost possession. Maryland gained it, and on their first offensive play, it's a 25-yard touchdown pass from MJ Morris to Caden Prather for a touchdown that puts Maryland ahead 7-0 really fast in this matchup within the first minute or so. And so, Daniel, all that happens. I don't think any of us are sitting up there in the press box and saying, run to the nearest red button, push it. Penn State's on upset alert. But at the same time, you're thinking, okay, is Penn State bringing the proper mentality that's going to be required to handle business? Obviously, they scored the next 44 points in the game. They dropped the hammer in a big way, as we've seen them do year after year in this series. But that start went about as poorly as it possibly could have for Penn State.
Definitely. I don't necessarily think, like you said, that we were pushing the red button, but you perk up a little bit and your antenna goes up with, okay, what is this team coming with today? What do they know? When did they know it? Has that affected them at all? You can really start to ask those questions. But I think that you look at a Nick Singleton fumble, and that might be a little bit of a fluke. And then Jalen Reed said that on the touchdown pass to Caden Prather that it was man-to-man, and they just won. Maryland won that rep. We know that Caden Prather is a good wide receiver in the Big Ten. So it's not like it was a complete bust or anything like that. I do think that where you maybe did start to get concerned was as the drives went on and Penn State really struggled to get things going early on. Nick Singleton had that 66-yard kick return, which led to a 49-yard field goal from Ryan Barker. In my instant analysis piece on Lions247.com, I highlighted that as a really key sequence in the game where if you're Penn State, you need to get points. You want to get points down 7-0, and then Singleton, gives you a little bit of a boost, with that kick return. And you look at the drives that were surrounding it, and it's fumble, field goal, punt. Those last 2 punts are 3-and-outs. That field goal was 4-and-out. And you weren't necessarily concerned. I think that this is a thing where Penn State is the deeper and more talented program. Maryland, well documented that they get to this time of year and they just have not built up that depth and talent to withstand a long season. So I figured that would win out over time. But you thought maybe, okay, like I picked this game 45-13. Like, okay, maybe this is a 27-15 game. Maybe this turns into like 21-10 and you leave and no one really feels great about it. But Penn State kicked it into gear. They found it, and I think it really ended up the way all of us expected to.
There were 9 possessions that started in the first quarter. It was a very strange first quarter. I mean, there was a lot of opportunity. Maryland scored that touchdown on their first play, and then you look at their next few possessions. I believe on the next 4 or 5 possessions combined for Maryland, they didn't even reach 25 yards, which is what they got on their first play. Once again, we saw this defense take care of business. They had 3 interceptions on the game. They had 2 other turnover on downs. So as James Franklin pointed out in post-game press conference, kind of felt like they had 5 takeaways on the day with everything that had added up. But Maryland, they went with MJ Morris at quarterback. They didn't have Billy Edwards. He was questionable coming into the matchup, had a thumb issue, left early last week. They're the number 1 ranked Big Ten pass offense, but we talked about some layers to that. They're constantly playing catch up this year. They're 4-17 coming in. They don't have a ground game. And in this case, Penn State's defense ultimately was able to limit them to less than 200 total yards on the day. 2 of 12 on third downs was Maryland. There was a point early in this game where Terps head coach Mike Lotzley, I thought, showed his hand. He was going to take some chances, understood maybe how this matchup was laid out for his team. And they had a turnover on downs there. I think at that point it was 10-0 Penn, or 10-7 Penn State. They had just come up off their first touchdown. I may be wrong off that. It may have been 7-3 Maryland, but they go for it on 4th down from their own 30-yard line. That gets shut down. And on the very next possession, Penn State goes down, marches down, touchdown. One of 4 consecutive touchdown drives for Penn State. 4 touchdowns in that second quarter, and we just saw them completely take control of this matchup, go up 31-7 by halftime. And in that first half, Daniel, what stood out to you during those touchdown drives? Because we saw Drew Aller not as sharp as we've seen at different first halves of late in Big Ten action. There were a couple misses on 3rd down when they were punting the ball early, but overall, getting it done with his legs. He had a touchdown run. He had a touchdown pass to Tyler Warren in this matchup. You had Tyler Warren, I think, at 99 total yards in the first half, 60 yards receiving, 30 yards rushing, and 9 yards passing. And then Nick Singleton with another strong first half. I think he had 60 yards or so on 11 touches, including a touchdown for himself. So what stood out to you as Penn State kind of righted that ship, turned on the Jets, and went from trailing 7-0 to up 31-7 right before halftime?
You talk about that sequence where Mike Locksley went for it on 4th and inches from his own 30. I think I like that call. I know it might have been a little early for it, but you're not going to a bowl game. Like, you're 4-7. You're a 25-point underdog. And we can get to this later, but that James Franklin is going to try to put up a lot of points on you. So you need to try to stay on the field. You need to try to score. Obviously, Penn State just had the edge in the trenches today. I mean, both MJ Morris and we saw a little bit of Champ Long, like, they got hit a lot and they got hit hard today. But for the Penn State offense, I think that sequence where they get the stop on 4th down and then it's 3 plays, 30 yards, 35 seconds. Like, it looked so easy. Probably could have just been 2 plays, but there is a review, and I think Nick Singleton got marked down at the 1, leading to the Drew Aller sneak. But when you look at the drive chart, like, before the drive before their first touchdown drive is 13 plays, 60 yards, 532. Like, I think that was one of those drives where after they scored and they, the PA or press box announcer said 13 plays, I was like, oh, it did not feel like that. And when it's like that, it kind of makes you feel that there are a lot of empty plays in there. But then you look at what Penn State did from there, 3 plays, 30 yards, 5 plays, 60 yards, 213, 6 plays, 46 yards, 227. Like, I think that they just started picking up chunks of yardage. It just looked easier. It just looked quicker. There's good Tyler Warren involvement, and it just felt like that they were really humming in there. And I think that was a big positive for Penn State, especially given how things started.
This is the 3rd time in 4 weeks where Penn State surpasses 200 rushing yards. They finished this afternoon with 219 total on the ground. A bunch of guys involved there, but Nick Singleton was the one who led the way. He had 13 carries last week, 13 carries this week. We're starting to see him get more volume. 87 yards on those 13 carries. It's a 6.7 average. He's been at 4.8 or better for yards per carry now in 4 consecutive games. You look at the 3 games that preceded that and followed the absence against UCLA in early October. He was below 4.2 yards on average in each of those 3 games. Twice he was under 3 yards per carry. I will note here, Katron Allen now, I believe this is 5 times in the last 7 weeks. 6 times now in the last 8 weeks that he has gone under 4 yards per carry 13 carries, 34 yards for Allen, another guy who seemingly had a touchdown for a moment. Didn't quite get there, and I think Perbula finished out that touchdown from the 1 yard line on the reversal. But it's been interesting to follow here, Daniel, because again, you're not getting both of these guys operate on the same cylinder on night by night. I'm probably going to go back to September, the last time we saw them really do it together. But you've got Nick Singleton continuing to seemingly take these steps forward. He had another 3-catch performance. But what he's doing on the ground, showing the burst, getting to the end zone. He had 2 touchdowns today. He leads the Nittany Lions with 11 on the year. I'm not sure what's going on with Kaytron Allen and his lack of effectiveness. And I think that's a question as you try to look for the highest ceiling for this offensive attack. But I do know that when Nick Singleton keeps answering the bell and week by week feeling like you can tax him a little bit more and he won't have bad ramifications, that changes the equation for what this offense can accomplish.
This offense is completely different when Nick Singleton is a home run hitter. And there is a period in this season for most of October, essentially, where he was just a singles hitter and maybe a doubles hitter. And it just changes the equation for the offense when he can get out in space, run somebody over, run by someone. This is twice in 3 weeks or 4 weeks maybe, where we've seen him do something really nice on special teams in the kick return game. And I think that's the time where you really see it. That's when you see him, putting the throttle all the way down, pedal to the floor, maxing out. And it's like, okay, like you see that, you can see that skill, that talent come through. The dynamic with Kaytron Allen, I mean, is interesting. I mean, we talked about it for a long time that he was just so steady and you knew what you were going to get out of him. And that's really changed over these past couple of weeks, this past month, really. It's just hasn't been the same Kaytron Allen. Things have just looked a lot more difficult for him. You talked about it where he could turn a 3-yard run into a 5 or 6 yard run with ease. That's not happening. Sometimes it does feel like the defensive line will be in the backfield right away, a little bit quicker than in the past. I think that the run game just hasn't been the most clean. I think they've been able to find effectiveness, especially with Nick Singleton. Tyler Warren got stuffed once and stopped for a short gain today. We saw him get stuffed last week against Minnesota. I am interested to see how this running game is moving forward, especially when you frame it. I don't know where Oregon's ranks are in terms of yardage and things like that, but the reputation of a Dan Lanning team, of how this Oregon team has been built, going back to Mario Cristobal a little bit, is a little bit more of that. It's heavy, hard-nosed. They recruit well and have talent in the trenches. I hope that it doesn't turn out that they have like the Big Ten's worst run defense after saying that. But I think that in the framing of the Big Ten championship game, it's interesting, especially if you are in a close game where you need to milk clock, if you need to stay on the field, if you need to control the terms of the game. That's where Penn State's been at its best. When those two guys are working, you can set the terms. It's just interesting moving forward.
Oregon, by the way, at least coming into this weekend, I just looked it up, number 10 among all Big Ten teams and rushing yards allowed per game, 119 yards per game. Again, that their placement in those rankings could be adjusted after this 12th game for all Big Ten competitors, but middle of the pack to this point in terms of run defense. And with this offense, what has been the most reliable source of production, it's been Tyler Warren. And today we saw, 3 different ways on offense. We saw him complete a 9-yard pass to Nick Singleton. We saw those two connect earlier this season as well. We saw Tyler Warren get into the act as a receiver with a 20-yard catch and 68 yards and a touchdown on 6 receptions. We also saw him go 29 yards as a rusher on a nice little lateral throw from Drew Aller while he was on the move. So Warren at one point was the leading rusher and receiver. He didn't finish that way, but it feels like week to week, Daniel, depending on when you look at the box score, there's a chance that number 44 could be leading both categories. And after this matchup, again, you start to look at the records, more of them coming his way, most touchdown catches for any Penn State tight end. He now owns that. He passed Pat Freiermuth today. He is also the all-time records holder for receptions in a single season for anyone who's played tight end in the Big Ten. I think with 6 catches today, he's now at 81 on the season. And I think he needs about 8 yards to become the all-time receiving leader at the tight end spot in Big Ten play. So I like his chances to do that out in Indianapolis. And Daniel, this was the last chance to do it in the regular season for James Franklin, but he brought up the Mackey Award. He brought up the trip to New York for the Heisman. And let's face it, this is going to be a major promotional week for Penn State football, the kind that they haven't been a part of for the last several years. When you're one of the few shows in town here for conference championships, there's going to be a lot of attention. And when you watch Penn State highlights this year, and there's people across the country who are going to be kind of playing catch up on who the Nittany Lions are to figure it out going into the postseason, they're going to get a heavy dose of Tyler Warren doing it this way, that way, and week after week.
Yeah, I think that this is where you'll see Tyler Warren really step into that face of the program role because, everyone's going to want a piece of him. CBS, which is airing the game, they're probably going to want a piece of him. They're probably going to be putting him out there, showing what he did on a CBS broadcasted game at USC last month. I think that this is where Tyler Warren really has the chance to make an impact on people. I believe Heisman voting opens on Monday the 2nd and goes through Monday the 9th. So there's always people that file these things early, get it out of the way. But there is going to be people out there looking, to see, okay, what's this guy about? I haven't had a chance to watch Penn State this year. What is there beyond the catch against USC, the touchdown run against Purdue? Like, what else can he do? There's gonna be a lot of eyes on him, and I think that that's going to be something that is really, really exciting if you're Penn State. You haven't really had a spotlight game like this, and not only have you not really had a spotlight game like this, the other games that you've had have been similar marquee matchups have been against Ohio State and Michigan, and those two programs take up a lot of oxygen in the conversation, where there's a lot of it is about, when Michigan came to Penn State last year, it was all about Jim Harbaugh. When Ohio State has come here, it's been Marvin Harrison Jr., CJ Stroud, those types of names. Oregon is the number one team in the country, but when you're in the Pacific Northwest, you don't have that traditional Big Ten media base. You're a newcomer to the conference. You don't necessarily have that same built-up equity, maybe, even though you have been a player on the national scene for a while. So I think that this is the one time where you talk about being an underdog on the field. I think this is the one time where Penn State is going to be like the favorite in terms of media coverage and media attention, where instead of having to be part of like a 40-60 or 35-65 split with Michigan or Ohio State, they get to be 60-40, 65-35. I know Dylan Gabriel, you'll see some Dylan Gabriel, Drew Aller kind of matchup type things, but it's going to be really interesting to see how this shakes out. And like I said before, you can bank a lot of those perception points this week.
I just want to give a few notes on offense before we focus in on the standout who's been Mr. Standout, Mr. Consistent on the defensive side of the ball, especially in Big Ten play, and Abdul Carter. But we did not see Harrison Wallace out there tonight. We did see him out there, but we didn't see him involved in the game plan. He was listed as questionable in pregame, but he did not ended up taking part out there. It was Omari Evans, Julian Fleming, Liam Clifford. A little bit later, we saw some younger pieces. We saw Tyseer Denmark catch his first career touchdown. And by the way, this is the 5th time that Bo Perbula has thrown for a touchdown and run for a touchdown in the same game, getting that backup work at quarterback behind Drew Aller. You got, along with Tyseer Denmark, you got freshmen involved across the field. We saw that on the offensive line. You may have noticed Venga Ioane left the game for a brief period of time. He did come back. He's probably been Penn State's best offensive lineman, so that's important to note. And then Nolan Rucci, as expected, got to start at right tackle with Anthony Donko sideline long term. And so we'll get to that Tyseer Denmark touchdown catch in a moment, Daniel, because it came as time expired. It pushed the lead from 37-7 to 40, or 38-7 to 44-7. And it drew some comments from Mike Loxley, Maryland's head coach, after the game. But let's finish up on kind of looking at some of the star performances from Saturday by bringing up Abdul Carter. You talked about it in pregame. Your projection was he was going to finish the regular season with some round numbers because of his performance against Maryland. He certainly did that in the sack department, got up to 10 sacks on the season. He is the first Penn State player since 2015 to end up with double-digit sack total. He's at 19 and a half tackles for loss. I don't know where that is nationally right now, but he was number one among power conference players for tackles for loss coming into this matchup. And Carter's a guy that also got credited with a quarterback hurry today. And, I mean, you think about what was ahead of this young man last winter when he made this move, and it kind of went public, and people said, okay, this is going to be interesting to follow. By the time we got midway through Big Ten conference play, it was like, this ain't about projections anymore. He is doing it right now. And you can make a case that going into the postseason, Penn State has the hottest defensive football player in college football. There may be guys at different positions that can impact the game in other ways, but in terms of a freak off the edge, someone you've got to account for, they've got a weapon that many, many teams in the college football playoff conversation would trade a lot for to have at their disposal.
Abdul Carter's just been a complete game wrecker at times this year, and he did it again today with those 2 sacks to get to 10 on the season. I think you just see his burst when he comes off the edge. He's so quick. And then as the season's gone on, you've seen him be able to finish. And I'm not enough of an expert to say these are the particular areas where like you've seen him learn how to finish more. But you go back to September, and it's after that Kent State game, and he put a couple quarterback hits on there, but there is a little bit of a conversation that was like, where is this? I think there is, with what we know about Abdul Carter, the physical talent he is, the type of player he is, his dedication. I think a lot of people, maybe myself included, thought that this would be a little bit of just add water, like it's good from the jump. But it wasn't. You know, he's learning a completely new position. We heard it in the spring where James Franklin maybe tried to slow play it a little bit until we got to the blue-white game. And then once we got to the blue-white game, it was, oh, yeah, this is going to work. But so yeah, it is a new position. And I think that we had to see Abdul Carter learn how to do it, to get used to some different things. And since the Illinois game, like I think he's been pretty used to it. And this is what you've seen. He can just really affect the game in so many ways. And when you look at a big-time matchup, a Big Ten championship game, a college football playoff first-round game, a quarterfinal, this is the type of guy that you want on your team, because you can know that he can change a game on one snap with one pass rush. And he can also be, beyond the physical things he does, he can set the tone because of how he plays, because of that edge, because of how physical he is. And so I think that Penn State, that defense under Tom Allen, tonight, after that first play, they were just very, very dominant. And I think that unit is just playing so well going into this postseason.
I think it was that first play, 25-yard touchdown. The next 19 plays, because I know I was tracking it at that point, the next 19 plays produced 11 total yards for Maryland. And by the way, now we can close the book on third quarters for the 2024 regular season. Penn State never gave up a touchdown in the third quarter this season through those 12 matchups. They gave up 15 total points, none tonight, in that first quarter after halftime. And that's going to set you up well for some strong second halves, as we've seen over the course of this year. So there were 6 sacks on the night. Abdul Carter had 2 of them. Denai Dennis Sutton got into the act. There were 3 interceptions from 3 different players, the last of which was Dejon Lane. But we also saw Davian Collins come up with an interception. He's a guy who's played more late in the season because of Elliott Washington being unavailable following an injury against Purdue. And then we saw the 3rd interception for Tony Rojas, who has made some plays in the past game this year. But going to that interception from Lane, when I think at one point you had 7 freshman defenders on the field going up against Maryland's, essentially their first team offensive unit as the Terps are trying to put up points. Lane comes up with the interception. A few plays later, as time expires, you got Bo Perbila taking a shot to the end zone, finding Tyseer Denmark. Really a great opportunity for the freshman to get in the end zone, make his mark. But when these coaches come together after the matchup, Mike Loxley pulls James Franklin in for an extended period. Mark Brennan, as he often does, has Brennan Cam in the right spot at the right time. He gets a video up there. One of our colleagues on the Penn State beat, Max Ralph from Penn Live, goes over to Mike Loxley's press conference that's happening here in Beaver Stadium after the game, and he gets a whole heck of an answer from Loxley that includes references to BS in terms of what he witnessed. So we're going to tap into the only Maryland alum on this podcast. And I got to get your thoughts on what you make of a messy ending from Mike Loxley and James Franklin to this matchup. And let's face it, I know they've got that win in 2014 up here in Beaver Stadium when they wouldn't shake the hands before the game. People remember that. The 2020 game here during COVID when it was a really rough situation for Penn State. But the history has not been pretty in this series. Add this 44-7 result to last year's 51-15 result. In 2022, it was 30-0. In 2019, it was 59-0. The year before that, it was 38-3. The year before that, it was 66-3. Franklin has history at Maryland. He reminded us this week. He was the coach in waiting there once. The head coach there now, Mike Loxley, just finished 4-8 after back-to-back 8-win seasons, and he's going out complaining about James Franklin and Penn State's how they handled themselves at the end. So who's right, who's wrong? Is there a lot of gray area here? And ultimately, it's hard to say that James Franklin looks bad this evening considering where he's moving forward toward, which is the Big Ten championship game.
If you watch Brendan Cam, it's a pretty savvy move by Mike Loxley where you can tell James Franklin is going for the blow-by a little bit, but you see Loxley engage him and be able to hold him so he can't get away so that he can share his thoughts on that last play. I mean, I thought James Franklin's his explanation when he was asked about it post-game was, I thought, pretty solid as far as these types of things go. He said that Penn State had their 3s and 4s out there. We can vouch for that in terms of the defensive line and offensive line combinations that they had. And Maryland still had their 1s out there. I mean, MJ Morris threw that interception to Dejon Lane really, really late in the game. Roman Hemby, it was still in the game. I think he had the tackle on that last play. And James Franklin is the way that he approaches things. And it's not like this just against Maryland. But when those 3s and 4s are in, the 2s are in, he wants them to get the chance to play within the structure of the offense, to not just go out there and sit down. I know that it seems like that sometimes when Prabula is in there. I felt like last year that was one of the bigger criticisms where it felt like Prabula when he was out there was just run. But this year we've seen him throw a little bit more, especially in these later game type of situations. And so James Franklin said, you're running cover 0. You're coming after us. We're going to take advantage of that. If you don't want that, run cover 2. And then the other thing he said, which is perception. He talked about that this is college football where not only do you need to win games, you need to win games in certain ways. This is a Penn State team that edged out Minnesota last week, and a 1-point game. I think I was there. I watched it. That was a really good game. That was a hard-fought game. I thought Penn State, won it in a very decisive fashion, but not everyone can watch the game. Not everyone is watching that game. So you see Penn State beating a 6-win Minnesota team by 1, and you think about it a certain way. And so for Penn State to come out and hang 44 on Maryland, a lot of people, when they look at the box score, when they go through things, they're not going to know that was, as time expired to a freshman for his first career touchdown. They're just going to see 44-7 against the 4-8 Maryland team. Okay, Penn State did what they were supposed to do. And James Franklin knows that. That's a part of the game. I think that you can not like that part of the game if you want, but the reality is the way that people talk about certain teams from certain conferences and certain margins of victories against certain types of teams, you need to do something like this. And so I think from where Franklin was coming from, I completely understood it. I don't really have a problem with it, especially when you've got someone like all these freshmen guys who we rarely see on the field. You want them to be out there. You want them to get a chance. I know that people have made the point where, if roles were reversed and you were Penn State, you'd be upset too. That's just kind of how things go. But it's interesting. I mean, I think that there's a little undercurrent of bad blood but between these two teams. I think that Jalen Reed was asked if Penn State considers Maryland to be its rival, which whether or not Penn State has a rival is the age-old question for an unrivaled program. And Jalen Reed said that they don't look at Maryland as a rival, but he did acknowledge that there is a little bit of an energy and an environment to these types of games that I think is a little bit chippier and maybe a little bit more heightened. And I think that comes from the top down from both of these coaches who work together under under Ralph Friedgen, under Ron Vanderlinden at Maryland. I think that trickles down. But, Jalen Reed brought up the graphic from 2020, where after Penn State, or Maryland comes to Beaver Stadium, wins 35-19. They put the graphic of Rakim Jarrett standing over Beaver Stadium. Very sad. I think Will Levis is superimposed, and it said, "You were, we are." I think it was also captioned like "Sad Valley." And Jalen Reed said that they don't talk about these things a lot for motivation, but I think that the coaching staff probably reminded them that Maryland has disrespected them in the past. And I think that on the Penn State side, it's like when you talk about the handshake thing, it's almost lost that Maryland won that game when the way that people talk about it and how that's remembered. So it's another chapter. I checked, these two teams won't meet again until 2026 down in College Park. If I were to ballpark it right now, I would guess that the spread would probably be similar to the 24 it was today. And I think you could see Penn State score a lot of points in that game. And I think these are also two coaches that are not going to forget and are going to, keep this inside for a while.
Yeah, I think we heard Nick Singleton say something about that bad blood vibe from the other side of this series last week leading up to the matchup. And these guys, though, when you talk to them after the game, hear their reactions to when they came off the field and were starting to come off the field, and Penn State puts on the big screen board here in Beaver Stadium, Big Ten championship game clinched. Now, I don't know how much I'm buying it, but we were told by several of them that's when they learned they were getting to the Big Ten championship game. I think we had a few more candid responses in postgame, including Jalen Reed, who was like, yeah, I was keeping an eye on the Ohio State-Michigan game earlier. But at the end of the day, they get through this, and all of a sudden they've got a busy week ahead of them. I mean, this is the first time since 2016 where you're getting thrown a matchup and you've got a week to prepare for it. Usually you get into December, you find out who your bowl game is. You got 3 weeks until you play that team. Then eventually you get to face them on a neutral field. This time, it's going to be a rapid process. It's going to be rapid for us, too. I was just told during our podcast recording here, we're going to get James Franklin for a Sunday afternoon phone call. It's Big Ten championship week. There's going to be some conference-mandated media stuff for us. So a lot going on. And, oh, by the way, signing day is on Wednesday. So we got to figure out what this week is going to look like. Many of us anticipated Ohio State was going to win. So regardless what was going to happen here, we weren't going to see Penn State play again until the playoffs. That ain't the case anymore. And, Daniel, we're going to do our best to improvise. I know you and Mark very quickly booked your travel. You will be out in Indianapolis for this matchup. Appreciate the hustle there. I know a lot of people are going to have some issues with this small timeline and trying to find deal with budget-friendly plans to get out to Indiana. But we've already got that figured out. We'll be back with you for another episode on Monday. We'll get into some of the more details from this regular season finale, what stood out from the Nittany Lions from a personnel perspective as well. And then we'll break down what we're hearing from James Franklin, because by then I think we'll have a couple different press conferences in with him. And so we'll start to get a good look about this Oregon matchup, about where Penn State is coming into the postseason. And for now, Daniel, I don't know if we'll get to do it again here in Beaver Stadium. We'll stay tuned for that. But wrapping up game number 7 here on home turf for the 2024 campaign. It's been fun. We're going to be covering the college football playoff. It turns out we're going to be covering the Big Ten championship. And you've got one more thing to add before we say goodbye.
When you say that this may or may not be our last time doing this in Beaver Stadium, this is a little maybe inside baseball, but this could have been the last game, Penn State game in this press box as it stands right now. The Beaver Stadium revitalization project continues apace. And next year, I think we're going to be somewhere else. And in a couple of years, we should be in completely new digs. And so before the game, a bunch of beat corps got together, and we heard from some of the elder statesmen on the beat about some characters who've come through here. And I think it was just a nice little reminder that Penn State is a program with a lot of history, and we get to be a part of it. And this team is really, putting its stamp and being a part of this history too.
Yeah, they're forcing people to pay attention. We'll find out just how much they may find themselves in the history books here in Happy Valley over the next few weeks. They got a big one next Saturday, the playoffs beyond that. And unlike a lot of college football beats and a lot of college football campuses ending November and saying, well, let's talk about the offseason, we got a lot of football still to pay attention to in 2024, which is a pretty beautiful thing for us and for our listeners and our viewers. We appreciate you. We'll be back with more on the Lions 24/7 podcast. And between now and our next episode, catch up the latest coverage from this victory, from the impending matchup against Big Ten, or in the Big Ten championship game against Oregon. We'll have a bunch of coverage coming your way this weekend into early next week at Lions247.com. For now, stepping aside and just putting it out there, 75% off Cyber Monday special through this Monday. So if you were on the fence, hey, you got a playoff team to follow, you got a potential Big Ten champion to follow, hop on board with us for 75% off. On behalf of Daniel, I'm Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 Postgame Podcast.